It's March 2025. Singapore, a finance director joins a Zoom call with her CEO and senior leadership team. They need to authorize a payment. It's urgent. $500,000. She wires the money, and hours later, she realizes none of them were real. Every person on that call was an AI deepfake. That's not a hypothetical. That's happened 8 months ago, right here, right in Singapore. I'm Thomas Taraniuk, and this is What the Fraud, a podcast by Sumsub where digital fraudsters meet their match. Over the next 2 episodes, I'm bringing you conversations from Sumsub's WTF Summit right here in Singapore. We talked about crypto security, AI fraud detection, regulatory enforcement, the whole ecosystem. And here's what I learned. The criminals are organized, they're well-funded, and they're tech-savvy. But so are the defenders, so are we. And we might actually be at a turning point. But the question is, will we move fast enough? So let's dive in. Introducing Hassan Ahmed, the country director for Coinbase Singapore. Great to have you on What the Fraud.
Thanks for having me.
So let's start big. Crypto's moving from a speculative asset to an actual payments infrastructure for many retail users and business users worldwide. Stablecoins, CBDCs as well, the whole 9 yards. How do you innovate yet build trust at that scale, Hassan?
I think the trajectory of crypto started out with Bitcoin, but really it was, once Ethereum came around and it was programmable, and then stablecoins became this concept that have been proofed into existence as of about 7 years ago,
Yep.
is when we saw this sort of new innovation take off of how do you decouple the volatility that people traditionally associate with crypto assets with just stripping out so that you can leverage the underlying technology of, real-time settlement with blockchain rails. And so stablecoins today are north of 300 billion in circulating supply. That really implies that they have found product market fit, and there's a lot of transaction velocity happening on these rails as well. If you look at Visa's dashboard that they provide around stablecoins, I think there's about like 10 trillion of adjusted payments volume. So that sets aside the trading activity that happens with stablecoins. And what that's suggesting to us is that there is real economic activity that is happening on stablecoins today across consumers, across businesses, and across institutions. So how do you get to this point and then go further while making sure that you're preserving elements of trust?
Right.
In my mind, it cuts across on 2 directions and substrates. So one is around sound regulation. I think that this technology is maturing fast and is at a point where you need to address some of the systemic risks that have cropped up with stablecoins that we've seen in past cycles. And that is being addressed by frameworks that like regulators are putting down on the ground around the world. The Genius Act was a landmark bill that got through this summer. You're seeing the effect of that. Banks, big retailers,
Yep.
scale fintech platforms sort of jumping into the fray. Closer to Singapore and Asia, there's at least 4 jurisdictions that have their own stablecoin framework that they've announced as well. And I think it just sort of goes to addressing this underlying risk of, hey, how do I know what's backing these stablecoins? So these the core concepts are that they need to be high quality liquid assets, that they need to be custodied with a sound custodian, and that there's some reasonable guarantees around redemption that they have to provide, so that you always know you can cash out one for one. So that's already in place. I think that the second challenge that the industry is now going to have to face is this notion of fraud risk, scam risk, and some of these other vectors that are happening across the ecosystem, but are certainly coming to crypto as well.
Excellent to hear. Singapore, Hassan, has become a very big poster child for the war on, let's say, crypto crime, and also for smart crypto regulation. How's that shaping innovation here versus, let's say, the rest of APAC and Europe?
One thing you have to recognize about Singapore is that it's an open economy. It's a small, dynamic economy that has to stay paranoid but open at the same time to thrive and be competitively positioned.
Right.
So after it became a financial hub, it quickly became a fintech hub as well, and now is a digital assets hub. But the reality is that a lot of the economic activity is at least pan-regional, if not beyond, because the domestic economy is small. So they're very good and agile about making sure that, as new technologies get assimilated into the banking stack, what are some of the guardrails that they need to think about, not just for their domestic economy, but on a cross-border basis as well. So one of the things that we see in Singapore that is really helpful for us is some of the work that the Singapore police force does with their anti-scam center. They recognize that this scams are surging, especially domestically, causing a lot of losses for victims. It could be elderly, it could be working professionals. And they wanted to get ahead of it, and so we've been working very closely with them on the digital asset side. How do we connect data flows on a near real-time basis with banks, so that the money doesn't sort of escape the system by the time like that, so the bank becomes aware of it.
Well, this collaboration is really exciting to see, especially with, of course, local regulators, the police force, and the industry itself. But Coinbase is also joining global coalitions such as Tech Against Scams, right? How are these collaborations beyond, let's say, the data sharing, building trust across the entire ecosystem, not only for the retailers, but also for other businesses as well?
Yeah, I think it speaks to one that this is a kind of a global issue. It requires a lot of ecosystem and whole of society approach because with these flows are now so fluid and they're just so trivial
Yeah.
to kind of take across borders that we have to sort of step up and be part of the solution here. I think we're also beyond data sharing. We're also just working on sharing best practices. I think there's internal tooling and technology that we've developed over the years. So even blockchain analytics, we're fortunate that we have this incredibly rich annotation data set. Being one of the oldest and most scaled crypto companies around the world, that we can provide to our partners, other FIs, so that they're able to ingest those into their risk engines as well.
You're absolutely right. And one of the most secure as well. Last one for you, Hassan, today. Since we're at the WTF, the What the Fraud Summit here in Singapore, what fraud trend should crypto and payments watch for 2026? And how do we stay one step ahead of this new type?
I do think that deepfakes is probably the most top of mind for most of the ecosystem.
Yeah.
So, I think the ads that you guys were running were helpful to illustrate that point as well. But
Yeah.
the reality is that they're just getting better and better, and they're appearing more and more realistic. So that is something that we are taking a very close look at. I think there are counter technologies to figure out, hey, does this feel real, does this not? I feel like a lot of the industry was focused on regulations and providing kind of regulatory frameworks. I think that now is the time to really focus more attention on specifically around scams, fraud, and illicit finance and the like, because this is coming. This is coming for us all.
Yeah.
And it has just become trivially easy to subscribe to these fraud as a service type, bundles out of a box, and anyone around the world, can go get it. I think closer to home, we're just seeing, especially in Southeast Asia, there's just been so many fraud networks that have spun up. I think that's also contributing to some of the regional, issues over here. So, in Singapore, we have really kind of resourced up and staffed up our payments risk and global intelligence resourcing to really focus on this region. And I think it behooves a lot of the industry providers, the core, bank players, the regulators, these task forces, to look at Asia and intensify the work that we're doing over here.
Absolutely. I think education of the public is super important as well, and that's something that I hear that you're doing, of course, with the people that, of course, use Coinbase's app.
Yeah, I think one of the benefits that we have as being a kind of scale consumer platform is that we can provide this rich user education. We even in Singapore, when users are onboarding, we do kind of take them through a risk questionnaire of, look, do you understand not just the risks around like digital assets, but are you aware of like how you need to secure your account, for example?
Thank you very much, Hassan, for joining us here today on What the Fraud podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Hassan's point about ecosystem collaboration, that's the theme of this entire summit of What the Fraud, because fraud doesn't respect industry lines. A scammer hitting crypto exchanges is using the same playbook against the banks as well as the fintechs, which brings me to the next person whose job it is to protect the pipes connecting the entire financial systems across APAC. Karthik Ramanathan is the SVP of Network Services for Mastercard across the entire Asia Pacific. That means data, that means intelligence, and that means security for millions of transactions per second. Karthik, welcome to What the Fraud.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Karthik, you're seeing fraud patterns in real time that most people have no idea about. What are you focused on right now to keep the network secure?
I look back at the evolution of fraud over the last few years. And the interesting thing that struck me, and as I was looking at the What the Fraud Summit Singapore, one of the big changes that has happened over the last few years is a lot of focus has shifted from fraud on the payment network to the real time scam frauds that happen across. Now, some of it obviously flows into the payment rails as well on MasterCard, but a lot of it is actually focused on real time account to account payments. And interestingly enough, as a big participant in the payment ecosystem, we get asked constantly around how we can deploy tools to help in that space as well. And that's a very interesting space for us because if you look at digital payments as an overall ecosystem, if you're making customers move from cash to digital, anything that comes in the way of the trust they have in the digital ecosystem impacts us as MasterCard, impacts us as a larger digital payments ecosystem. That's absolutely fundamental to make sure that everybody is working together, collaborating very well in terms of making sure that what we can do in terms of keeping this ecosystem safe and secure is being done. From a MasterCard perspective, we've been in this journey for quite a few years now. In my previous role, I was the head of this vertical called Cyber and Intelligence Solutions, or currently called the Security Solutions Organization. And the role of the unit is very simple. It looks
Right.
at a very diverse set of capabilities that are focused around keeping transactions in the MasterCard network safe and secure.
Okay.
To give you an example, we started off with looking at card present transactions, the introduction of the chip and introduction of the capabilities on the card itself. But the world very quickly moved towards the online world, which then became a focus around authentication, around verifying identity. And then somewhere around 2017, 2018, we saw this huge shift of this fraud moving towards cybersecurity. So we started looking at what enables this kind of a fraud to happen, which interestingly enough is mostly around cybersecurity. It's about data breaches. It's about storing of data in areas where it shouldn't be being done, or leakage of data from areas where you don't expect. So how do you and we operate a network of 30, 40, 50 million merchants and billions of customers. How do you make sure that every one of these different ecosystem participants is being protected from a cybersecurity perspective, that data is actually being kept safe?
Certainly the case that billions rely on your networks, right? MasterCard's AI-driven fraud systems like Trace as well and consumer fraud risk can detect scams in real time now. That's super exciting. But detection isn't prevention. How does connected data across the entire network globally help us provide fraud beyond, let's say, or before money actually moves?
If you were to look at what the challenges with the scam flow is,
Yeah.
right? You have a customer who's making a transaction from their account, transferring money to another account. Now, these could be across different banks, they could even be across different jurisdictions from a country perspective. Now, all that the receiving bank or the sending bank has is information about their own customer. And therein lies the problem. If I've opened a mule account in a bank, and I have 10,000 customers transferring $10 each into my account, the only bank that has any idea that there could be a fraud happening is potentially the bank that has my account. Every one of the other 10,000 people who's transferring money into their account have no idea that I'm a scamster, or the fact that the banks don't know where the money is going. And then you also have the exit route, which has been very, very popular, which is to move money into the crypto space, move money across borders, which makes law enforcement that much more difficult in terms of being able to track down the criminals who are actually behind these cases. Now, what we do, and we have this live in the UK, for example, is we look at the entire ecosystem, and we monitor transactions on a real-time basis, both at the sending side and on the receiving side, which basically means if the money is moving from a account that is compromised, we know about it at the time of the transaction. Same with where the money is moving. If I see suddenly a huge volume of transactions going into one account, or a lot of small ticket transactions going into one account, or somebody who's never transacted making a transfer of $150,000 suddenly for an investment, those are transactions that get automatically flagged so that the banks can get in touch with the customer and understand what's the nature of the transaction and stop the fraud before the money is moved. Because the minute the money moves, it is layering, it's very quickly moving into the crypto space, back into the banking ecosystem. It just becomes that much more difficult to track.
Certainly the case. But with Mastercard's, let's say, ambitions moving forward, crypto card issuing is on the table as well. Where do you see a lot of, let's say, the challenges within this industry moving forward?
From a pure card rails perspective,
Mm,
at some level, if you think about it, crypto is just another currency that you move. So, to that extent, as long as you're fully embedded with your fraud capabilities,
yeah,
tracking a transaction from end to finish, that's still going to be reasonably secure. I think the challenge is when it starts moving different rails. When it's not on the card rail, it's moved to the account rail or it's moved to a wallet rail. Then you have different jurisdictions, different entities that come into the picture who need to have the same data to be able to control transactions that are not secure. And
certainly.
therein lies the challenge for the industry.
I mean, fraud cuts across banks, fintechs, crypto, telcos, and so much more.
Yeah.
What does real cross-industry collaboration look like, and what needs to change for the industry to actually better work together?
So, Mastercard, for example, is the founding chairperson of this entity called Global Anti-Scam Alliance in
Yep.
Singapore. It is basically an association which brings all the people that are involved in the scam chain who want to come together to fight this battle. How do you bring everybody to a common level of understanding? How do we work with law enforcement, with government agencies in terms of making sure that the legal framework supports exchange of data for the right reasons? So we're talking the not a trade-off between privacy and security, but the right balance between privacy and security so that you're able to use that data for the right reasons in terms of stopping that fraud from happening and assigning responsibilities to each of these different entities through a process of collaboration and cooperation rather than because there is no one entity that actually decides who's going to take the liability. You
Yeah.
want to get them together for a dialogue so that each person understands the steps they need to take to be able to slow down this process.
Karthik, it sounds like you have the plan under wrap, right, for industry-based collaboration, which is fantastic. How do you balance innovation speed and transparency and consumer protection, of course, with the regulators moving forward?
I think somewhere it is around the realization that we are fighting an unequal battle right now. You have the fraudsters on one hand who can freely run across rails, use every single tool they have at their disposal. The job of the industry is to put a cohesive plan in front of the regulators to say, this is what we're going to be doing. And this is the reason why exchange of data beyond what is allowed today as per banking secrecy or telco regulatory acts need to be allowed for the express purpose of stopping scams. All
Certainly.
right. So I think the answer is the fact that regulators understand that there's an uneven battle right now. One team plays by the rules, the other team doesn't know which game they're playing right now. So how do you get the two together? I think the answer lies in being able to work through associations like Gaza
Mm.
to bring everybody on the same page to say what does what does a responsible data sharing model look like, what does a responsible set of tools look like that uses this data and sends out information that each of these entities is looking for to be able to stop the scams.
As fraud gets more organized, it gets more AI enhanced or AI driven, in fact, what would you say is shaping, let's say, the next phase of prevention and how best we can prepare as an industry, not only in APAC, but globally?
I think the use of AI in terms of all the tools the industry uses in trying to stop fraud is heartening
Mm,
because you need powerful tools to be able to stop this kind of fraud. If I look forward 5 years, I do expect to see a lot of the power of AI being deployed by the fraudsters as well. I think the industry needs to move faster. The industry needs to, at some level, make sure that there is education at the consumer level in terms
mm.
of what looks like a fraud. When I look at some of my feeds on my phone, sometimes I struggle to make out the difference between what is AI generated and what is real. So I can only imagine a fraudster trying to create these videos to be able to get access to funds is going to be fairly sophisticated. So, how do we educate consumers to spot what looks like a scam, when their antenna should go up in terms of making sure they do a secondary, third check in terms of making sure that the transaction is real? And then getting the industry, as I said, working together in terms of exchanging signals at different points of time and moving the job of preventing scams from the time of transaction to being an everyday affair. And I say this with all seriousness because I don't think a scam happens when the transaction happens. A scam happens when, for example, a mule account is created or when a good account is taken over by a fraudster and made into a mule account.
Yeah.
Now, how do you put the right amount of focus on those actions at different points of time so that stopping the transaction almost becomes natural because you already know.
Certainly, very good points. And I think like what we can conclude here today is a willingness, of course, within industry, within crypto and TradFi together, cross industry, and also with regulators to share big data and figuring out, of course, all of the fraud networks and the key pieces is super important to stopping what is a growing industry, right?
I think this industry is going to continue going. And at some level, I always say this, you just need to make sure that the cost of doing business becomes very high for the fraudsters and disrupts
Exactly.
most of their flows. So I think the industry wants to do more around this particular space. So that gives me a lot of comfort and confidence that we are on the right track.
I'm so glad to hear it. And that's what we want to do at the What the Fraud Summit and on the What the Fraud podcast is educate those and bring those together who want to make the change.
And congratulations on an awesome event. It's been beautiful so far.
Wonderful to hear, but I won't take all credit. Wonderful to have you, Karthik, on the podcast today. And
thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Fraudemic. That's not hyperbole, that's a reality. And if you're a financial institution in APAC right now, you're navigating regulatory expectations that are tightening by the quarter. My next guest is Caryn Leong, Regional AML Director for APAC at the Association of Certified Anti-Money Laundering Specialists. Caryn Leong, thank you for joining.
Thank you for having me.
Where are financial institutions in APAC feeling the strongest pressure to evolve the AML as well as sanctions programs? And what do you believe is driving that, Caryn?
So I think in terms of pressure points across the region, we're looking at fraud. You're also looking at sanctions complexity, as well as regulatory expectations that are really rising very, very quickly. Like you say, it's constant change all the time. It's not so much of a single piece of regulation. It's actually the pace of all these changes. The movie and everything,
Everywhere, all at once.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's exactly how it feels. And on my panel, we talk about the fact that, sometimes it feels like a fire drill. It really is, right? How do you keep up to date? How do you track changes? There's so many things that you would have to do. I used to say that it's kind of like, you're a little bit of like a circus, the spinning plates.
Yes, absolutely. And there's so much noise as well.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you're just trying to keep everything up in the air all at the same time. Now, what I do think that financial institutions are feeling the pressure points, potentially client due diligence because of complexity of the structures. You're also looking at clients with more of the digital asset wealth coming online. How do you corroborate that? You're also looking at cross-border clients because of lack of transparency. How do you do all your regular client due diligence, right? You need to be fairly exhaustive and creative at the same time. There's also sanction screening. So sanction screening used to be fairly black and white. You're SDN, you're not SDN. I think gone are the days of that. It's not black and white. It's just many, many shades of gray. And sometimes it feels like, when you're trying to do a jigsaw puzzle, but you don't have that picture on the box.
Yeah.
And try to figure out.
It can be quite aimless then. Very difficult.
I think it's challenging, right?
Yeah.
Because you're just trying to look for that needle in the haystack, right? And then sometimes you wonder, am I identifying the needle or did I create more hay?
Okay.
So that's quite difficult for compliance professionals. There's also the technology uplift. So I just came back from our Hong Kong conference. We're talking to the regulators about it. A lot of conversation circles around technology, not just legacy systems. What about new technology? But the fact that is your technology working? And is it working today? We're talking about effectiveness. How are you deploying it in the right way? How do you evidence that it's working in the right
Right.
way? So all these coming together means, there's a lot of things that's happening. Do you have big teams that can help you manage it? Do you have little teams that have to do all that? So it depends on the size of the financial institutions or organizations that are all dealing with this. Now, to your point, or the question is, what's driving the shift? Combination of factors. Of course, we're talking about high velocity fraud, right? It's scale and speed. It's difficult to get on top of it. It's also the geopolitics. It changes all the time. You wake up in the morning, you don't know what's happening, and there's something new and interesting on the news, and then before you know it, your list get updated. You got a volume of alerts that you have to get through. It's all very challenging.
From the point of view of fraud and AML as well, converging really fast across APAC, where are you seeing that most clearly? Because you identified, of course, it's almost like a jigsaw puzzle and you don't know the end sort of picture, finding a needle in a haystack. And how can, let's say, smarter data sharing help you on that journey as a business?
So I think where the convergence I see as coming, and we had this conversation for the last 2-3 years already, where I do see it coming to convergence is really the scam to laundering pipeline. That's when we're looking at where the fraud proceeds are coming very quickly onto the mule accounts, into the fintech rails, and then off into the digital asset very, very quickly.
Yes, yeah.
Faster cross-border layering. We have a use of high-velocity wallets. It's also increasing reliance on social engineering to bypass our traditional controls, right? Because now with social engineering, you're the one, right, authorizing that transaction, but to a fraudster. So controls need to keep up with that. Criminals are also arbitraging between your AML frameworks and your fraud prevention frameworks. To your question around smarter data is not the silver bullet. Unfortunately, fraud, anti-financial crime, all very complex issue. There isn't
There isn't a single silver bullet, is
no,
there?
there isn't. But smarter data sharing actually helps. It helps in terms of cutting off a criminal activity, hopefully midpoint, right? As I've mentioned, we're talking about this scam to laundering pipeline. It would typically go from a scam or fraud into an account to another bank, potentially going into some sort of fintech or going into a crypto exchange and then into DeFi, and then it gets lost.
Got it.
So if you're able to share the information within the ecosystem, hopefully you can cut off that transfer before you lose it completely. So what you want to do is share that information so you all get together and tackle it upfront.
Certainly the case. All get together and tackle it up front. You've mentioned before, fighting scams takes a Justice League approach. I love these sort of references to movies that you have, and doing it together is certainly one of the objectives, right? What does effective collaboration, let's say, as it stands in that remit, across financial institutions, telcos, regulators, look like in real life?
It's more like weekly calls, monthly meetings, exchanging data protocols, sharing red flags, sometimes a little bit of crisis management. So there are a lot of nuts and bolts and very rudimentary things that goes into this whole collaboration. Now, the strongest models that we're seeing in APAC typically would have 3 traits. One, everybody brings their superpower to the table. So in context of what we're saying, banks, of course, can see the payments. You have telcos who then see the calls. Platforms will then see that social engineering happening. You would have regulators, and FIUs who actually see the pattern. So when they all come together, that's when everything makes sense. You can't do it separately. There's also willingness to act very, very quickly. It's really, a 3-minute or 30-minute kind of sprint as opposed to a 30-day consultation. You don't have time to exchange information. I don't have time to send you a STR. I don't have a time for a request for information. You need to act very, very quickly. The other thing that we have noticed is really trust, right? Trust is difficult to build, but we've also noticed that organizations share information and are more collaborative when they believe that the red flags that they share or the information that they share are not being second-guessed, or if they're not going to get punished for it. So a certain amount of safe haven is actually very much appreciated.
I mean, how does education and communities help institutions move from, let's say, compliance theatre and drama to real life sort of saviors?
If we talk about training, oftentimes when we talk about compliance training, people have a tendency to think that, oh, it's passing an exam, taking a quiz. The best kind of training is when it becomes meaningful. You can translate it and then you understand why you're doing it. It moves from being a process to you genuinely want to do it because you understand why you have to do it and why is it important. So ACAMS try to do it, try to bridge that gap in terms of educating individuals, because training to a large extent helps individuals or professionals understand why the controls are in place, and allowing them to spot the red flags proactively.
Certainly super interesting. And of course, I want to link this back to a point you mentioned earlier, whereby everything's changing year on year.
Yeah.
Fraud types and vectors change,
Yes.
right? Our defenses must change. And also perhaps the training that individuals must take must change, right?
Yes.
From 2025 to 2026. So I would like to ask you, what's one fraud or financial crime trend in the FI or financial institution space in APAC that individuals need to prepare for next year?
I think I'd like to take it from Mr. Rajakumar's keynote speech in the morning, and he talked about AI-enabled fraud scaling faster than controls, right? It's probably a lack of speed. Fraudsters are going to use technology and leverage it. Going to become faster, bigger, better at what they do. And I think that conversely, right, for those who are fighting financial crime, they also need to get faster, quicker, better at fighting financial crime.
These are excellent slogans as well. Faster, bigger, better. I can imagine that for a very nefarious sort of a money laundering campaign as well. Are there any unique, let's say, situations around types of fraud in APAC which we don't see in other regions around the world, from the North Americas to Europe, etc.?
There are certain variances. So take, for example, in the US, check fraud is number one
It's
typology.
huge, yeah.
In Asia, when was the last time you saw a check?
Certainly can't remember.
Right. So there are nuances to it. But I think if you look at the life cycle, or you look at the way a fraud is done, there's always the social engineering aspect.
Yeah.
Right. And then it moves very quickly into engaging individual, the sense of
It's
urgency.
a sales funnel, like a business, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
And they've got it down pat. So I think for us, it's the need to kind of get ahead of the game, right? And
Yeah.
be more proactive.
Well, Karyn, you're certainly fighting the good fight, right? At the end of the day, I think you're doing what's needed to be done to protect businesses and also the communities of these financial institutions, everyday retailers and users such as myself. Do you imagine on the other side of the coin, the fraud networks and fraud as a service, of course, providing a very similar, the antithesis, right, of a solution where they're training others how to get away with a crime? So it's almost a battle between, I'm not going to go back to the Justice League. Come on, Tom. But
Good and bad.
Good and bad,
Good
isn't
and
it?
evil.
Yes, exactly.
It is. We talk about information sharing, smarter data.
Yes, yeah.
What makes you think that the bad actors aren't doing it? They absolutely are doing it. And they're probably doing it better than we are because they don't have regulations like data protection, data privacy, right? Whereas we all do. So I think we need to get smarter too.
We do, but we can't bend the rules. We have to
That's
be
true.
within our confines and
Think out of the box, I guess.
I guess so. Absolutely. Well, Karyn, thank you so much for joining us on the What the Fraud podcast here at the What the Fraud Summit as well in
Thank
Singapore.
you for having me.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of What the Fraud. We hope you enjoyed these episodes and these conversations from the WTF Summit organised by Sumsub here in Singapore. Please hit that follow button on your favourite podcast platform. And if you want to hear more about what we do here at Sumsub and how your business can actually benefit from our verification services, definitely check out our website at www.sumsub.com and subscribe to all of our socials. Stay safe and see you on the next one.